Ijebu.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you today? Hope you've had a great lunch. And because of your great lunch, I'm going to beg you, do not fall asleep. You cannot fall asleep. So I'm going to ask, with Lola's kind permission, right? Because we've just eaten, can we all just stand up?
Yes.
Right? And just stretch a little. You know, go to your left, turn to your right, just stretch. Use this as an excuse. Stretch up, stretch down, try to reach your toes. And then just say hi to someone sitting next to you, in front of you, behind you. How you doing? Yeah, if they see you falling asleep, they have permission to like give you a friendly little pinch. Thank you ever so much. Please have a seat. Great to be here, first of all. Lola, super well done. Can I please ask you to help me give a huge round of applause to Lola, Shoneye, and team? You guys are doing an amazing job year after year. You're all an inspiration. God bless you all. Hi. Hello, Boulders Books. Great to see you. Okay, so we are here to talk about children's books. And I know up until, I would say, until about 7 or so years ago, in our environment, children's books were kind of relegated to academic books. And suddenly there was this, I'm going to use the word renaissance. And we suddenly had brilliant writers just prop up writing storybooks for children, books that children would find interesting, fascinating, easy to read, books that they would read without anyone asking them to. I was sharing some interesting facts with someone not too long ago about the 2022 global market value for children's books, right? Was like double digits in the billions. I don't want to say the wrong figure, but the portion for picture books in 2022 globally was over $4 billion, right? So it's a huge market. It's worth paying attention to what's going there, not just because of the money involved, but also because of the impact. And so I'm delighted and honored today to have two very amazing children's authors sitting here on the panel. I've read both their books. And I don't even, it's like a kid in a Gani show. I'm not sure who to start with first. But I'm going to start with Bunmi. So, Bunmi, I've read your book, I'll See You in Ijebu. I've read it like maybe 6 times. If you haven't read it yet, please do get a copy. It's simple, but it's deceptive in its simplicity because it's loaded. And I want to find out from you, what was your inspiration? I'll tell you a little bit about the story. It's a transgenerational love story. That's how I see it. It's a transgenerational love story. It's by faith, meaning that it covers a family that has more than one religion, but they've managed to unify themselves despite something that some people would consider something that divides. This book shows that religion does not have to divide. It can be you can find a way to get along despite differences. So what inspired you to write this book?
Thank you, Bunmi. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's such an honor to be here, not only at the Ake Festival, but also on this panel. I was inspired to write this story because, number one, I live in the US, and I didn't see any books that were telling our stories. And by our stories, I mean African stories. And the stories, the books that I was seeing was very stereotypical, and I just got so frustrated. And I just felt, if I see one more children's book talking about a random African village, I am going. And it was just really frustrating. And so that was one of it. But the other thing is, I just wanted to tell my story. You know, so this book is about growing up here. I grew up here in Nigeria, grew up in Lagos. And my grandparents, who are Muslim, and a lot of my extended family are from Ijebu. My mom is from Ijebu. And growing up, we would go from Lagos every year and go to Ijebu to celebrate Ileya. And it was very much the norm, and I grew up Catholic, so it was very much the norm to go to Mass on Sunday and then, go eat Ileya meat, And so I just wanted to tell a story that represented who I was and that just told a very normal Nigerian story. I mean, that's very normal for a lot of us here to celebrate, each other's holidays.
Thank you. So there are two follow-up questions I want to ask you based on that. One is about this, your use of the word normal, like wanting something specific. In my opinion, you've put Ijebu on the map. You've rebranded the place, in my understanding, consciousness at least, as the place where love lives. And I hope that and we'll have time for you to just read a little bit from your book. It's a place where love lives, and that concept is repeated in the book. So there may be some people here today who are wondering about children's books, about writing children's books. You've written about something that is quote unquote normal, yet it's fascinating, it resonates, it's relatable. Can you share why you felt that this particular experience, going from Lagos to Ijebu to visit grandparents, would be something that's worthy of a book that is going to be seen globally?
Yes. So, thank you. So you picked up on a fact. I think when we met earlier, the first thing you said to me was, "This is a love story," and I almost cried. I was like, "Oh my God, yes, it is. You get it," because in the US, where the book is published, the story that people are grasping onto, or the concept, the theme that people are grasping onto here is the fact that it's a multi-religious story. That's the first thing they reach for and they grasp for. But at the heart of it, the very intention behind it was this love story between Olu and her grandfather, Baba. And I felt very strongly that that was a story that could really resonate with anyone, no matter who you are, where you're from. You have that person in your family, and some of us are fortunate to have that in grandparents. If you're a parent and you have kids, you know the relationship that your parents have with your kids. You're like, who are you? Because when we're growing up, this is not how you were with us, but they have this very special relationship with your kids. And I had that with my grandfather and my grandmother, but there was this very special, tender relationship between my grandfather and myself. And I knew that was a story that could really resonate. And not just only with grandparents, but special people in your life. And it was also this idea of familial relationships. So when you see in the book, she has relationships with her uncle Ayo, who drives them the road trip, and her aunties, and there's this, they all have special nicknames for them. And it's so very much the idea that we aren't an island, and there are people around us who make up our community. And maybe it was something I was missing in the US, because now I'm thinking about it. That essence of growing up in Nigeria is very much the village, and you're not alone, and there's very much a community who loves you deeply, and who pours so much love with you without expectation. And so that whole concept, and you picked up on it, that it's throughout the book, Ijebu, where love lives. And Ijebu for me is, yes, it's a place, but it's also a space, right? And it's a space that exists wherever the people who see you are, right? It's wherever you are, wherever you're around people who pour into you and love on you. And so that space, that love space, is what Ijebu represents to me.
So I'm going to come back to you on a couple of things, right? But for Tonye, hi. So as I'm sure many of us know, Tonye is the founder, the creator of the Ugo and Simpson series. And the book that we're talking about today is Ugo and Simpson Learn About Down Syndrome. Now, you may be thinking, Down syndrome, how is that a topic for children's books? But I tell you, Tonye has mastered the ability to distill something incredibly complex into simple words that do not lose their meaning, do not lose their impact. So the book, for me, I find, is relevant for adults as well as for children. So my question to you is this. there was one of the many workshops I've attended. One of the speakers said something about when you're writing a children's book, or any book for that matter, you're writing for an audience of one, that you need to identify that one that you're writing for. So I want to ask you, when you were coming up with this particular Ugo and Sim Sim book, who was your audience of one?
That is such an easy question. So thank you for that. I was a bit worried because your stuff was deep. Literally for my son. So it literally was a book for my son. It wasn't meant to be public. It wasn't meant to be anywhere. It was written because we had a conversation where he was asking about his sister. And I had to explain to him that she had Down syndrome. And I did just a terrible job. Like, I confused him. And so, yeah, I had to kind of fix that quickly so that he just didn't think I was a crazy person making up stuff about his sister. And it was really for him. It was really like a way to redeem myself in how I wish the conversation had actually gone. And yeah, who knew that all this would be happening? So yeah, it's literally driven from our own need as a family.
Thank you for that.
Oh, so you might not know, my youngest has Down syndrome.
Yes, so the book is about a real-life Ugo and Sim Sim. And Sim Sim has Down syndrome, and Ugo, in the book, wants to know how come his sister gets to have these sessions with a lady that comes to the house from time to time. And his mum has to gently, lovingly, and clearly explain that this is the reason why your sister's having these sessions. And, you know, you turn something again, something that could have been a sad story into a story full of hope. And you said she has an extra chromosome, and in the book, your son is asking, well, does this mean she has a superpower? And then there's this beautiful illustration of Sim Sim as a superhero with a cape and everything. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think when you enter the world of disabilities, especially if you have a child and you're not expecting to have a child with a disability, the immediate thing you're told is negative. What your child won't do. They will never achieve anything. They will never walk. They will never talk. They will never work. They're kind of just a burden. And that's the narrative that you're told for some parents, even before you've given birth. That's the narrative you're being told. So your expectation is not one of hope. It's not one of love. It's not one of joy. You're expecting suffering. You're expecting every negative thing. It's the end of the world. But in reality, it's not. It's the complete opposite. I found that having a child with Down syndrome has been the saving grace of our family. She's a wonderful, wonderful human being. And so, thank you. I so wanted to kind of express that. Not in a preachy way. I don't believe in preaching, or, you know, this is how you should be, but just telling the story. And it was important that in telling the story, the Down syndrome is just one character. Just like Lagos is just one character. For me, it was important to represent them as a whole family unit. A mother, father, children. It's very rare for us to see a whole family unit in picture books, in children's books. Or animations. It's very rare. You don't see, we're usually depicted as animals. And we are not animals, we are human beings. So it's very important that I normalized it as much as possible. And I don't make a big deal about the Down syndrome. It literally is just a part of our life. There's love, there's warmth, there's joy, there's challenges, just like any other family. But for me, it's important to express to children at a young age about it, about living with this, about being a family with this. So when they have an inclusive school, when they have a friend who's autistic or has Down syndrome, they already know about it. It's not a big deal. And they grow up. So they become our advocates. And when the parents are reading to the children, the adults are learning because honestly, parents are the problem. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. Why do you think that contemporary realistic fiction is important in children's literature? And I'll just provide a little bit of context to that. So, of course, everybody here knows that there are different genres, you know, in adult literature as well as in children's literature. So, and as I mentioned earlier, in the beginning, I don't know, a couple of centuries ago, children's books were didactic, teaching about morals, about manners, about religion, and things like that. And then a little bit later, we had storybooks and things like that that talked about play, that recognized children as, you know, beings in their own right, that deserve these pleasant and joyful books, etc. And then we had a season of books that were like idealist, or, you know, and then we had realism. So the kind of books I write, as Lola mentioned earlier, I'm also a children's book author. The kind of books I write are here and now realism books. I talk about what happens today, here and now. And the books that Tonye writes in the same way. The book that Bunmi has written is unique in as much as it is here and now realism, but then the illustrations, which I'm coming to talk to you about very soon, are, I don't know, I'm speechless. I find them beautiful, and they're beautiful in the way that they are. I'm going to use the word odd and controversial, and I'll get to that, you know, in a minute. But back to my question to you: why is contemporary realism important in children's literature?
I mean, in my opinion, I believe they need to see themselves. I mean, it's just as simple as that. The power in representation cannot be underestimated. I mean, we as adults, when we are represented, it's a big deal. So imagine the impact that has on a child's brain. So for me, it was about representation as normalized as possible, as mainstream as possible. You know, I always say my advocacy work is not in the sideline in the disabilities community. My advocacy work is in the mainstream. And that's why the books are so important, because they can enter any home. And most of the people that own the books are from households who don't have any disability. They just enjoy the stories. The children ask questions. The advocacy expands within their, you know, zone of influence. So it's really, really important. Even something in my book. So we are pitching the books as an animated series. We for the next 6 months, from the end of this month. Now the story I've picked is one of the upcoming books. We haven't started illustrating it yet. It's about a new chair. Normal story. A lot of you will identify. You know, there's that prime position chair in front of the TV. And for us, in our household, we used to beat ourselves to get that chair. It was fights. So literally, it's a similar story about this new chair that replaces the banged up one, and who is going to get that chair first. I mean, there's nobody who cannot identify with that story. The mummy and daddy in it, running joke is there's a lot of PDA, right? Because people think black couples don't do PDA. I'm like, black couples do PDA, and we're going to do that.
Display of affection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are affectionate to each other. So it's a running theme where the kids are like, yeah, Grace, get a room, you know? So it's something that I wanted to, you're laughing. There's something I wanted to kind of pick on those pieces that aren't so typical in what we see, but are typical in everyday life.
Okay, so like a number of questions have come up based on what you've said, but I want to segue into talking about illustrations. Now, of course, as we all know in here, children's books are children's books because they have illustrations that help to enhance the story. The very best illustrators, and I can see some of them in this room, the very best illustrators, they improve on the story. So you give them the manuscript and they find an angle that maybe even you as an author haven't quite thought of, and they enhance the story, they deepen the story. So I want to talk to you about your choice of illustrator. I've already mentioned about the art, practically, to me, every single page of your book can be framed, can be blown up and framed and displayed in a museum. I feel the illustrations are that beautiful. And I love them because they're minimalist, yet they have so much detail. They contain so much. And I think this goes back to this theme of having relatable characters. They've depicted what we have, your illustrator has depicted what we have here as our everyday experience in Lagos or in Nigeria, but elevated it to something that is worthy of being in, I'm going to say the Louvre. Just forgive me, I'm the one holding the mic, so I can, right? So you've made our life, our way of life, our experiences, something worthy of being seen globally, right? In the most highbrow of galleries, right, if I may say so. But the choice of using your illustrator and the choice of that type of art, it's flat, it's almost cubist, if you like. Think of Picasso, but black. How did you decide that that was going to be suitable for a children's book, an African children's book, in particular?
Yes, thank you. This book wouldn't exist without Diana Ejaita, who is brilliant. She is brilliant. We share an illustrator, Lola. I think she illustrated the cover of Baba Segi's Wives. She is brilliant. And so I encourage you to just check out her work on her website, on her Instagram. She's phenomenal. Now, as far as how she became to be the illustrator for this book, it's all very serendipitous, actually. When Barefoot Books, my publisher, bought the rights to the book, they said, oh, we have this illustrator who we had we've reached out to do another project, but we think she'll be perfect for this because she's Nigerian German, I think. And so they reached out to her, and it turns out her husband, she lives in Germany, her husband is from Ijebu, right? And, Ijebu, as you all know, is this tiny, tiny, tiny town. I live in the U.S. Well, not tiny, tiny. Ha! Emma Binu. Not tiny, tiny. But you know what I mean? But it's, I live in the U.S. I've written this book about Ijebu. The illustrator is in Germany. And so what are the odds, right? That her husband is from Ijebu, number one. And two, they just closed on a plot of land in Ijebu 10 days before the publisher reached out to her. So it all kind of worked very serendipitously. And so when they reached out to her, I saw some of her work, and I wasn't sure how it would work in the form of, this book. Diana has written a couple of other books, children's books. Olu and Greta is one of them. So I looked at that, and I had a sense of what the art was going to be like. But nothing could have prepared me for seeing the drafts. It was incredible. And what she's done is take my words and elevate it in a way that just continues to blow my mind. And she was able to really bring to life, especially there's a scene in the book with the streets of Lagos, where you have the hawkers, and that's my favorite scene in the book. And so it's interesting that you speak about the Louvre and, galleries and things like that. What she has done is what I really hoped would happen, is to really help kids who live outside of Lagos really envision themselves in Lagos. So I use Paris as an example very often. Paris is very branded. If you're traveling to Paris, you know what you're getting. It's the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, etc. So it's very branded in that way. And so even if you've never been to Paris, you kind of have a sense what it'd be like to be in Paris. You're going to get some croissants, you're going to go to the Eiffel Tower, take a picture. And so what I wanted to do with this book, especially with the smells and the sounds and the description of the scenes of Lagos, was to really bring Lagos alive for kids who have never been to Lagos, right? And so that when they travel to Lagos and they're here, then they go, oh, this is what Lagos feels like. I have envisioned myself there. I see myself belonging there, right? And so that's one of the things that Diana has done such a great job in capturing in the illustrations.
Yeah, so again, you've raised two things, and I'm going to try not to forget them. I'm going to stick with my question about art, about your art. So blackface, how many of us know what blackface is, particularly if you've lived, outside of Nigeria? So blackface, historically, I'm going to use that word, has been used to denigrate people of African descent. But I feel like your book reclaims that narrative and says, no, yes, we can use blackface to illustrate things, but we're depicting love. We're depicting family. We're depicting our culture, and so on and so forth. Because it's a really bold move to use something that, quote unquote, has a history that is derogatory. Yeah. But you've turned it around to show people of love. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So what did you think when you saw, blackface characters being used to illustrate your story?
I thought it was very powerful, right? And so, for those who aren't familiar with the publishing process, the first thing I saw was the black and white, right? So when they sent me the draft, most of the illustrations were in black and white. And so it was immediately very jarring and very powerful, the use of that very black ink, I guess, to illustrate the people in the family. And it, like you said, it just shows us almost, we, and by we, I mean in the US, because we have all these race issues, right? And the way the word black is associated with something that's negative. Like, for example, if you get a pack of like painkillers or something that has, with drugs, something that has a very high risk of side effects, they call it a black box warning because it tells you the very serious side effects. So that word black, is associated with a lot of things that are negative. And so for her choice, Diana's choice to use, this very dark, and it's not just like black, it's like the darkest of the dark ink to illustrate the people, especially in the scenes associated with such love and warmth. There's a page in there where Baba and Olu hug each other, and it just exudes such warmth. And I think it sent a very powerful message to the audience who are kids, right? That black is beautiful, and black should be associated with all things positive and warmth and love. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. I agree with you. So I'm going to come, not that I don't have more questions, I do. I'm going to come to Tonye. So about your illustrations, actually, before I ask that question, I'm privileged to own one of the first edition copies of Ugo and Simsim, Learn About Down Syndrome. First of all, for other people who are Ugo and Simsim fans, can you tell us a little bit about why you did a new or a different edition and what the difference is between this edition and the first edition?
Okay, sure. So initially, I did Ugo and Simsim, What is Down Syndrome? For my kids. I spent way too much money with a company illustrating, but they did a great job. Way too much money. And also, I couldn't get a publisher. Like, no one wanted to work with me. And a lot of people said no, which is fine. But then there were a few who said no with viciousness. That, why am I writing about such a thing? That I say stigma, it's a shame, that I should not be writing such things for children. And those are the kind of the feedbacks I originally got 5 years ago when I was first writing the story. But because it's not something I just did out of fun, it's something because I had a need myself. And I was starting to get in touch with other families who are going through this. And so I knew, because literally a few people came to my house and said, oh, your son showed us my son this book. Now only you get them. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll self-publish. And that was, yeah, a steep learning curve. But you know what? I actually think it was good that it happened that way, because I could really learn what this whole industry is about. And that's how I got to know Bunmi, because actually her book, Diary of a Toddler, was the first Nigerian children's book I got when I was researching this area. And we still read it to this day, 5 years later. And we have all her books, because we love her. And Lola's was the second, actually. Was it Toby and the Masquerade? No. Maiwa and the Masquerade. Still have that. So it was something that I was kind of just navigating, learning on the go. And over the few years, on my own, yes, we did have some bookstores who distributed, who were kind enough, who saw us, but the others are, you have to go and fight. Now, when they have your book, you have to go there and make sure they put your book in the front and not hide your book in the back and be telling you, no, our clients only buy important books. We only carry important books. I fought every person, because I was like, no. And again, that's how we formed Association of Children Authors and Illustrators of Nigeria. AK is also a member. He's over there, because we had to kind of join forces. So it's really in that journey. I've sold over 5,000 copies of my original books. And last year, a couple of other publishers started knocking on the door. And then Lola and I had a conversation. And in that conversation, she really understood what I was trying to do. It's not just a storybook. It's not just stories. It's advocacy. It's representation. It's pushing forward. It's giving people hope. So there's so much more around it, but it's all kind of at the center of the nucleus of what we do. My foundation is called Simone's Oasis, but really it all started because of these books. So when Lola and I agreed we're doing this, I signed on to WIDA. She was really kind to me. I think maybe if I wasn't, maybe should have been a bit more brutal, I don't know. But she was so nice. We're talking, even when we don't agree, we talk about it. She explains. And you have to be humble in this game. And you have to be open to learning. I mean, I've just flicked through Bunmi's book here, and I was like, oh my God, I need this book. I need to read. I need my children to see it. I need to learn from what other people are doing, other ways to tell stories. And it's so much fun. So what has been really cathartic is to be able to express my pain, my grief, and my hope and joy through these stories and through these characters, and then working to improve them, right? Because it was just me in a tin can on my own. But now somebody saying, hey, you can do better. And you know what? I can. And she's given me templates, some workings, more stories are coming. I'm so excited about the next book. Because we talk about another aspect. So my daughter doesn't have autism, but she shares a lot of the traits. So they say she has autistic traits. And I really, really wanted to write a book that spoke to autism, because we are honestly living with that as well. And I'm just so excited about that, because, you know, there's so many more people living with autism and intellectual disabilities that the chance to tell a story from that character's perspective, from their own voice, I just so excited about. And it's such a good story. And me and Lola, we just can't wait.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, Tonye, when did you realize the power that picture books can have in not just in a young person's life, but in a society? And I'm going to preface this question with something. When I started writing children's picture books, people thought I was wasting my time. They're asking me, what are you doing with comic? Why are you writing comic? Or children's books are supposed to be written by children. I'm like, no, they are not. So people really didn't understand. I'm coming from a corporate background. I've been, in the past, I've written like policy pieces and things like that. So people are like, why are you coming from that to writing these comic books? I'm like, they're not comic books. These are picture books that go through this whole process of education, or shall I say re-education, letting people know the difference between a comic and a graphic novel and a picture book, and that there's actually nothing wrong with any of these art forms, because you can tell, the point is to tell a story in a manner that the reader finds relatable and interesting. So, back to the question, when did you discover or realize the power that a picture book can have, on a community?
So there's a couple of books I picked up, but I understood the power from the lack. That's how I understood it, because I really, really wanted to help my son, and it was so crushing. It was soul crushing, actually not so crushing, but soul crushing, to spend hours and hours looking and not find anything. Not find anything that, let's not even talk Nigeria or African, that even had a black American family. Nothing. There was nothing that had a black character with Down syndrome. Nothing. So what I found were stories that had Caucasian characters, and even then, they were only one-offs. They weren't, you couldn't grow, if you really liked a character, you couldn't then continue to grow like we have with Toby. And that was, I found that really, it really crushed me. And so it wasn't like suddenly I had the aha moments to go. No, it was just a kind of a slow burner that was triggered by watching my children playing and seeing my son go out of his way to help his sister. And then after that, they were kind of giggling together, and it just stayed there. And it was such a simple thing. And my background is in TV and film production, that I just thought, you know what, I can do this. I can write something for them. And that's really showed me just how important representation is.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, indeed. So we have a few more minutes left before we're going to open it up for questions, but I want to take the time to ask each author to just read a little piece from their book, if you don't mind, because this is a book chat after all. And I'm really hoping that you're going to read one of my favorite pages, but I'm not going to prejudice the selection.
So I'll read from my favorite page. And so, as I said, this is the story of Olu, who lives in Lagos and makes the road trip with her family to Ijebu. And so this scene is where the car pulls up to the house, the Baba and Iyakin's house. The car pulls up, and the kids get out of the car and they run to their grandpa. And so Baba rises slowly from his seat, leaning on his walking stick. His face lights up with delight. He steadies himself for our embrace, his skin soft and slightly wrinkled. His arms are wide and strong and squeeze the three of us tight. His deep, joyful chuckles makes his body dance a happy rhythm. Oh, my Baba. Wow. I bury my head in his chest. His scent of native black soap and mothballs, it surrounds me. I breathe it in and hold it there for a future memory. I was not expecting that, but thank you.
So this kind of is a segue to a question. How do you tap into this well of emotion and how do you translate that emotion into words on a page that move readers? And you're doing it for children, which means that every single word counts. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I like about your book is that it is tightly edited. right? So how do you do that for the sake of budding writers in the room?
First of all, I have a great editor, Kate DePalma, Barefoot Books. What I really appreciated with Kate is she recognized that I'm very much a rule follower and I follow instructions. So she gave me very specific instructions, but then she let me be free to edit in a way that still honors the story, right? She didn't go and mark it up. And so I really appreciated that, hence the tightness of it. She's fantastic. How to write in a way that allows you to tap into that emotion is vulnerability. You just have to be vulnerable, and it takes practice. It's being really open and true to yourself, and really, even though it can be scary and it can feel like you're naked, right? But it's really being true to yourself and really honoring the feelings that come up for you whenever they do. And so, but that takes practice. It's hard, but you can't sit down one day and say, I'm going to be vulnerable and write. It's not going to work. But it's in your everyday life, just being vulnerable and being true to yourself, honoring your feelings, which can be really, really hard depending on how you grew up. It can be really, really hard to honor those feelings, but just doing that on a frequent basis, but then also doing it with the people you love and honoring their feelings and just being open to that exchange of energy and vulnerability really helps you when you now sit down to write. You've opened that heart space, right? And then allowing your truth to flow out.
So this is how, in my opinion, this is how you write a best-selling fiction book, is to find something that's relatable, find something that will touch your reader, and move them to tears, perhaps, So I'm gonna just ask another question real quick. You deal with a difficult subject. Baba in the story has had a stroke. And you managed to talk about this in a way that is not overindulgent, but you touch on it and it pings, at the heartstrings. You talk about the way he walks, shuffling his feet, or the fact that he has a particular place where he wants to sit because of his stroke. So can you share a little bit about how to deal with complex issues, but in a manner that a child can understand, and in a manner that an adult can still relate to?
Absolutely. The one thing I want to mention, just to lay some foundation here, is even though this is a picture book, and picture books people consider them for kids, I love picture books. Oh my gosh, I nerd out over picture books. And I think what picture books can do for us adults is really help heal the child in us, the inner child, right? Wherever you are on that journey. Like, picture books can really do that. So if you're not one who ventures into the, children's book space, picture book space, please do. Please buy picture books for yourself because they're really powerful. And so, having said that, kids observe everything. So they may not know or may not be able to put a label on that thing, but they know their grandfather walks with a shuffle, right? They know their grandfather has a stick. They don't know what happened. And often, growing up, nobody really shares that information with you, right? You just have the visuals. And so it was really important to me to write a story that honors the kid's point of view. And I say all the time that I don't want to dumb things down for kids. Kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And so I really wanted to honor what they're seeing, what they're feeling, right? And so what's been really interesting is I've been reading this book at different schools, and I see the way their face lights up, so something I do is I say, who in here has special nicknames for their grandfather, right? And you have kids who have like Indian heritage or Chinese heritage, and their nickname for their grandfather is Baba, same as, it was for me, growing up in Nigeria. And so I say all that to say that I try to write what a kid may be feeling, may be seeing. But then that's also done by allowing myself to go there to my inner child and to remember how it was for me growing up and what were the things that I was seeing and what I was feeling. And so one more thing to answer your question is I also think about that moment between a parent and a child reading this book to their child, right? And so I honestly think that bedtime story moment is probably one of the most intimate moments as a parent, you know? And so I really wanted to create something both for the child and the parent in that moment. So as they're reading it, they're remembering, you know, and connecting with their child in that way.
Yeah, you've mentioned something very important about children's books. One person reads it, another person buys it. So you have to appeal to both the reader and the buyer. And the very best children's books have both a text, which is the obvious storyline, and a subtext, like something underneath, something that the parent can resonate with and pick up, and so on. Sorry, I'm seeing this huge message here. But before we start the Q&A, I'm going to ask Tonye, please, could you just read a little bit from your book?
Sure, I'll do
Thank
something real quick because every opportunity I use to advocate. So at the end of my book, I do 5 things you should know about Down syndrome. So since you're all here, you're going to learn something. So firstly, Down syndrome does not mean people with the condition are down. That's just the name of the condition. People with Down syndrome feel emotions just like anyone else. They can be happy, sad, excited, or angry like you. 2, every person in the world is unique, and so are people with Down syndrome. 3, people with Down syndrome are capable, loving, and talented. With help and encouragement, they can go to school, have jobs, and get married. 4, everyone should be treated with respect, including people with Down syndrome. 5, and the last, March 21st is World Down Syndrome Day, and October is Down Syndrome Awareness Month. You can show your support by wearing mismatched socks, because socks look a bit like chromosomes, and people with Down syndrome have an extra one. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, a round of applause for our speakers today, for Bunmi and for Tonye. So we have some time for questions, and I see already a hand raised at the back. Do you have a microphone, sir? You can, the gentleman in the checkered shirt. Do you have a microphone so you can ask your question?
Sorry, hello. My name is Mahmoud. I'm a comic book writer and a lawyer by profession. I'm trying to get used to saying that. Award-winning comic book writer. So earlier, the host talked about comics, graphic novels, and other forms of art. So I wanted to get tips as a comic book writer, if I want to write children's book, how I would go about it, because there are a lot of different things one has to look out for when writing children's books.
Okay, who would like? I mean, I'm happy to answer that, but so for children's books, first of all, find a relatable story, and it doesn't have to be far-fetched. It can be if you have a mind for fantasy, etc. But it can just be here and now. It can be something that's happened, like traveling to Ijebu, or explaining a situation about chromosomes and having an extra chromosome. It could be about getting up and going to school. It could be about creating a comic book. Right? So first of all, you have your story. Then the next thing is, I would say you need to research. Look at all the different categories of children's books that are available. There are so many. And you need to decide which category you want to write for, which age. Are you writing for 0 to 1? Are you writing for toddlers? Are you writing for over 5s? Are you writing for under 10s? Are you going to do a YA novel? Is it going to be an early reader chapter book? Is it a picture book? Is it a board book? You need to decide all of those things. And then also, for some people, they look at what prizes and awards are available for children's books, and sometimes people tailor their writing to be able to enter their book for a particular award or a prize, right? And I don't diss that at all, because one way or another you have to fund this passion, get this story out there. Then so you do your research. you decide which type, which genre, which age group you're going for, and then, and only then, do you start to now work on your draft. Now, one of my favorite workshops that I attended was by a lady whose nickname is the Unkind Editor, and she talked about how you need to do at least 7 different drafts, and you may think 7, is that overkill? But no, she says, look, there's 7 drafts, and I'm going to try and remember as many of them as possible that you do. But, you know, let me see if I have it here so I don't get it wrong. So there's the first one is the vomit draft. She calls it the vomit draft, where you just write whatever it is that comes to mind. The second one is the story draft, when you actually, you know, craft the story, work on the story. The third is the character draft, when you build up the characters. The fourth is the technical draft, when you make sure you got your spelling correct, your grammar correct. The next one is to do a personal read through your work. And then after that, you do a friend read. You find a friend, you say, please read my work, and don't get offended with the feedback that they give you. And then finally, you do a professional edit of your book before your book is ready. Now, I'm sure the children's authors in here can attest that it can probably take longer to do a children's book than it does to write a novel for an adult. Why? Because you only have a limited number of words that you're going to use. You have to work really closely with your editor. And I repeat, do not get offended. Don't be so married to your words that you can't see the wood for the trees when they tell you to cut something out. And your illustrator, I know you probably will write and illustrate your book, but for those who don't illustrate themselves, finding the right illustrator who understands what you're trying to do, who understands the story, is critical. They can really elevate your work if you get it right. I hope that answers your question. Yes? Okay, another question from this side. ABK, go ahead. A microphone, please. We have someone with a question on this side.
I'm shy. This is for Tonye. I don't know if you could please share with us your own story, how you zeroed in on your illustrator. We heard about hers. Yours is missing, so I think it would be nice.
Sure. So originally in the first series, I actually started off with somebody. I kind of reached out to a few people. They gave me sample characters, and there was one guy I ended up with, and he was so beautiful, but he was just not reliable. And yeah.
Truth.
So I was like, do I want this book done? Then I cannot use this guy. So that's when I said, you know what, I'm going to go look for a company and use them. And they delivered in every way. It was great, except the bill was much. But anyhow, this time, we had a few people that Lola had sourced and I had sourced. And a couple of them sent, you know, their look and feel of what the characters would be. And it's not that easy to get someone to understand what someone with Down syndrome looks like. I wanted to stay away from very kind of, what do you call it, caricaturish, right? Because this is, honestly, for many people, parents, adults or children, it'll be the first time they're looking at someone and interacting, even though it's fiction, with someone with Down syndrome, and I didn't want to do a disservice. So for me, they are based on my children. We ended up going with Insikak Ifet, and he seemed to get what I was looking for. And it was really important. To be honest, I really didn't look too much about the other things for illustration. For me, they had to be able to get our Sim Sim character. They could do Ugo, great, all they want, but if Sim Sim's off, sorry mate, it's not happening.
Thank you. Okay, so the gentleman in the blue shirt and then Inobong. Okay. Okay, the gentleman in the blue shirt and then Inobong. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ray, and I had like 2 sort of questions, but like 1 each. So Tonye, I wanted to ask, how would you say or how did you go about like writing about Down syndrome, and what advice would you have to writers that want to explore disabilities without having it cloud the story? Then, Bunmi, I wanted to ask, how did you strike the good balance between not fully dumbing it down for children, but, also having adults want to read it?
Good questions.
All right, so I think that when you're writing, you have to think, who is it for? Or who do I want it to be for? Who do I want to be able to relate? And for me specifically, it's important to be universal with the story because, as I said, I want to mainstream our advocacy. It shouldn't stay in just the disability space. So for me, it's about those familiar stories. Disability is a character. It isn't the entire story. And so that helps people to also understand the dimensions of people living with disabilities. They are not their disability. They are so much more. The disability is just one factor.
Thank you. Bunmi?
That's a really good question. So I think it's writing for kids and writing with a hook, writing something in the text that hooks them. So for example, I think the second page, it talks about the food goes in the microwave, goes beep, 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 so that's a hook. There's another scene in there where there's a little bit of prose, and he talks, I think the scenes of Lagos where he talks about the honk goes honk honk and things like that. So those are the things that keep the kids' attention, right? You need those hooks. And then you also need a story that flows in a certain way that builds a level of anticipation, and that sort of climaxes. Like what is the main character looking forward to? She's looking forward to going to Ijebu and doing, helping her grandmother make the Ileya feast. And so you need those things that are very relatable, as Bunmi said, to kind of hook your audience. But then there's also writing in a way with some undertones that hooks the parent, right? So the parent knows that, oh, this is for me, and keeping in mind that unless you're writing a middle grade book, which is for ages 8 to 12, I believe, most of the time your children's book, your picture book, is going to be a shared experience between the parent and the child. So there's an opportunity for them to discover things together, to research things together. And the other thing I did, keep in mind that the hope, anyway, is that they read your book more than once. And so the next time they read, it's a little bit more familiar. They can go look at what is Keke Marua, thank God for YouTube, right? And so they can go on YouTube and use those things. So it's just keeping those things in mind, but then also realizing that even though kids may not be able to put a label on certain things or know exactly what something is, they have a sense. They're very, very strong observers, right? And so, finding that balance, but then don't be afraid to just write. Right? Don't be afraid to just write. I say all the time that that's why editors have a job, right? Don't be afraid to just pour out and write, and you can always tweak and find that balance as you go through the process.
Thank you. Thank you. The Inabong, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Very brilliant session. My name is Enobong Etuk, and I own a bookstore somewhere in the south part of Nigeria. It's my time at Uyo, actually. Akwa Ibom State, Uyo. Yes. The name of the bookstore is Boldo's Bookstore.
Enabong started a book festival in Uyo. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. It's actually my first time at Ake Festival. Thank you. So my question, first, I didn't get the name of the illustrator.
Diana Ijaita.
Diana Ijaita. I want to look her up. My second question is, as a bookstore owner, I thank God that Nigerians or Africans are beginning to write the illustrated books for children. But we sort of lose children between the age of 8 and 15. When they come to the shelf, they can't find anything African to read. you have the wimpy kid and the other,
Yeah, there is a gap. Yes.
This gap is there. How can we fill this? How can we?
By
What are you
attending
telling
festivals like
people in
this.
the room right now to do between
Yeah.
the age of 8 and 16, male, female, especially the male? They can't find what to pick up on the shelf, apart from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Doc Diaries, just a few here and there. How can we as African authors take up this challenge and fill up the gap?
So
Thank you.
I feel so passionately about this, and that's a great question. We have those authors in these rooms. We do. And so you need to tell your story. You really do. And we have amazing authors in Nigeria, like writers, storytellers. We're storytellers by nature, period, right? And I think it takes us really being brave and open to tell. I was telling someone yesterday that Jason Reynolds is an African-American author, has written this book from the perspective of a teenager, a young man, who is about to have his first time with his girlfriend. And so, but it's from the perspective of a teenage black boy talking about the feelings of being nervous and scared and, all the things that happen when you're about to get intimate with your girl, right? But that's not talked about so openly, right? But kids, 17, 18-year-olds are having sex and having these feelings, right? And so, that's just one example, but just write your story from your perspective and just put it out there, so.
Thank you. There's so much more that we could say, but we've run out of time. And I want to say thank you all to everybody here. You've been a fantastic audience. It's been great spending the afternoon with you. I do hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please, a huge round of applause for our authors, Bunmi and Tonye.